The Greek temple is part of the landscape. It appears suddenly, is detached with difficulty from its surroundings, but then unmistakable. The color and texture of the stone is beautiful, not only for its patina of ancient brilliance, but for its worth as sheer building material. The worked stone from neighboring quarries seems to spring from the soil, the texture of its surface as varied as the changing landscape. Light limestone from Selinus in Sicily, earthy brown, sun-soaked from nearby Agrigento, hard gray from the Peloponnesian mountains, white wind-scoured marble of Sunium, honey-colored travertine of Paestum, Pentelic marble with the waxen red patina of oxidized iron, coarse ashen gray shell conglomerate of Olympia. But this mineral magic of stone conjures up no vision of the temple in its pristine state. It is in truth a ruin. Altus, the sacred grove at Olympia, is neatly revealed here by the excavator's spade. The foundations and remnants of temples, altars, treasure houses, and away from the center, the training quarters and stadium of the Olympic athletes. That famous writer of guidebooks, Pausanias, visited Olympia about 170 A.D. His descriptions throw a contemporary light upon the excavations and dramatize the vigorous life cycle of this Greek power center. The great temple of Zeus, finished in 456 B.C., was the central point not only of Olympia, but of the whole of Greece. It had been standing for 700 years when Pausanias saw it in the days of Marcus Aurelius and the 238th Olympiad. But it was not the architecture that attracted Pausanias. He was more interested in historical anecdotes. He tells us of a workshop studio of Phidias, the tall shed-like building in the foreground of the model, in which Phidias worked on a statue of the enthroned Zeus, and where the actual foundations were recently discovered. But surrounded by the later richly constructed and reconstructed buildings, visitors' lodgings, administrative offices, training quarters for athletes, and the covered tracks of the gymnasium, the marble-roofed temple of Zeus always dominated the scene. Next to it, with a low-tiled roof, stretched out the ancient, honored temple of Hera. The temple of Zeus is the norm of the Doric form, a model in measurement and all other respects for what was to follow. The temple of Hera, a century and a half older, had been gradually transformed from a wooden building to one of stone. We must visualize the walls of what is known as the cella, that is, the inner chamber of the temple, as a half-timbered construction fitted with mud brick on a foundation of stone. Originally, the roof supports and beams were of wood, and so were the columns, only replaced one by one as necessity or tradition demanded by columns of stone. The columns of the Hera temple were about 20 feet high, those of the Zeus temple near 40. The platform of the temple, the three great steps leading up to it, the capitals with their supporting slab, the lion-headed water spouts of marble, all speak to us even now with a concentrated power that must have moved the worshippers of that time. The front of the temple, with its 6 columns, proclaims classical order. Behind the facade stands the entrance to the cella, the home of the statue of the god, a seated wood-carved figure covered with ivory and gold, looming 40 feet high, filling the area with majesty. It ranked as one of the 7 wonders of the world, although later objections were raised that the god would have lifted the roof off if he had decided to rise from his throne. All that remains is his picture on ancient coins, a truly godlike head. There were many other statues in front of the temple, Pausanias busily counted 24 bronze statues of Zeus alone. He tells us also of an altar outside the temple, a mountain created from the ashes of burnt offerings, growing higher and higher through the centuries. The altar belonged to the temple, but since all sacrificial acts took place under the open sky, the temple itself contained nothing but the shrine of the god. Naples, 23rd March, 1787. Goethe wrote in the diary of his Italian journey, "We had been uncertain whether our journey would take us through rocks or ruins, when at last some long rectangular masses we had already noticed from afar revealed themselves as the remains of temples." For centuries, the temples at Paestum had been lost to all knowledge in a marshy, malaria-infested, scrub-covered coastal plain. They were discovered in the middle of the 18th century when the road to the south was constructed, just at the right time, when interest in archaeology was becoming fashionable. While Goethe's traveling companion, the painter Knip, immediately took to his sketchbook, Goethe wandered about the ruins. To him, the blunt, thickly set mass of columns appeared terrifying. It took him some time to bring his concept of classicism to terms with what he actually saw. The romantic awareness of beauty in ruins, the sense of discovery, the enthusiastic copying of Greek art in Goethe's time, or our modern subjective photographic vision, neither can bring us close to what the Greeks saw as they stood before their temples, unless we stand there ourselves, perhaps, leaving preconceptions behind us. The Temple of Hera in Paestum expresses the Doric temple in its classical development. Its ruins are better preserved than others, and in them we can read the canon of Doric form. 3 steps alone, not scaled to the measure of a human stride, form the substructure from which the columns rise. Each shaft has carved, sharp-edged fluting. The column tapers as it rises. The curve of the capital, the echinus, literally sea urchin, carries the abacus, the square slab at the top, supporting the horizontal architrave, which connects the vertical columns. The architrave is the lowest part of the entablature, a single, uninterrupted band. Above it, there's a second layer of a row of triglyphs, that is, blocks with triple vertical grooves. One of these is placed centrally above each column, another halfway between. The intervals between the triglyphs form roughly square fields, the metopes. Thus the interval between 2 columns is cut in half by the triglyphs, and the rhythm is doubled, and paradoxically shortened. The cornice, the projecting ledge of the sloping roof, carries underneath a series of blocks, the mutules, which again have the intervals between column, triglyph, column. Thus to each interval between the columns below, there are 4 intervals above. The rhythm is speeded up once again. These blocks beneath the cornice, the mutules, and the projections underneath the triglyphs are studded with cylindrical pegs, the guttae. They presumably imitate the wooden pegs used in carpentry when temples were built of wood. Vitruvius, in his book on architecture, derived many details of form in the Greek temple from the earlier constructions of wood. He considers the alternation of triglyph and metope in the Doric temple to be a result of the earlier structure of wooden beams, with gaps or eyes between them. These open eyes were eventually blocked in with panels, the metopes, which carried pictorial decoration, while the beam ends were covered with carved panels, the 3-grooved triglyphs. When temples came to be built of stone, nothing structural corresponded anymore to triglyph and metope. They became decoration. But this tenacious adherence